it up from there.
Yeah. So the other thing is, all of us are aware of inflation.
Mm-hmm.
And so, $1 million, I mean, at one time, that was so far out. Now,
Right.
$1 million is, actually it should be in the range of possibility for all of us, you'd think.
We kind of really need to be targeting it.
Yeah. But the other is that that what we earn and so forth, it has to provide for really what we're going to need and more because of, again, inflation. So in other words, inflation is going to decrease the value of that $1 million.
That's right.
And meanwhile, the cost of living is going to be going up. So so we say at least $1 million, but anyway, it's a worthy goal.
Most people estimate that there's about 3% inflation each year on average, some years less, some years more. But so what that means for someone who retires at age 65, they can expect the cost of the basket of goods they're buying at age 65 to increase 250% or multiply by 2.5 by the time they turn 95. So that's a model to think from.
Yeah.
Something to chew on?
Yeah, that's why we're having you folks sit down while you're watching this. Okay, so you mentioned a book that you recommended.
I did. There's a good book on, a lot of people spend time thinking about, well, how much do I need to save? And that's kind of, you and I just started a very cursory introduction to that conversation because it is so specific to people. And if you want to read a book by a great author, this book has been well received, especially by the financial planning community. It's called The Number, and it's by a man named Lee Eisenberg. So I'd recommend taking a look at that book.
Okay, so folks, that's something you might want to pick up as a copy of Lee Eisenberg. Lee Eisenberg's book called The Number. I've read it. It's a good book. Okay. Well, what happens if you don't have a big enough retirement fund?
This is kind of like you hear some people saying, well, I'll live on cat food. If you haven't saved enough money, you probably push yourself to work longer into what you might consider to be your retirement years. More and more people are saying they don't want to retire these days, but sometimes people are forced to retire by health or physical condition. So you might retire longer. You might become dependent on public benefits. So like you were talking about Social Security, there's a shocking number of people who are living only on Social Security now. And it's sad and scary to think what will happen if, Social Security, we all know there's problems with the Social Security system. That's another show. But you don't want to set yourself up to be dependent on that program. Also, for some people, it's kind of a worst nightmare, but to have to go ask their children or maybe friends for money. So you start to lose, like I was saying earlier, freedom and choices if you don't have the money there.
Yeah, and where are you going to live? So, I mean, part of the thing that I've seen, well, again, people have used their homes as a piggy bank. And now some of them have actually gotten into the position, of course, where their homes are underwater and they're losing their homes.
Yeah.
And then you lost your home. Now what? Where are you going to stay? So are you going to stay with your kids? Are you going to stay in a shelter? I mean, it's frightening.
Yeah. It's like a little bit like financial contagion. Once things start to break down, you just never know kind of where you're going to end up because you can't afford to make those things available to yourself that you want.
The other thing is Social Security was never really intended to provide for a person's entire retirement. It was intended to just sort of be a safety net to make sure that people could sort of get by. But again, as you mentioned, with medical costs in particular being so high and so forth, it's just not enough.
No, it's certainly, regardless of what it was intended for, the amount that folks are getting as income from Social Security isn't enough to provide for a decent standard of living for most people.
Okay. We need to move along. The time is going to escape from us. We're having such a good time here. Okay, so what difference does it make when you start a retirement plan early in life? And related to this, we have a slide that we're going to show to you folks.
Yes. I thought that the table that we put together was really interesting. You can see that basically what this slide shows you is how much you need to save each month, starting at various ages, to accumulate $1 million by age 65. And that 6% rate is the growth rate. So that would be kind of a mix of stocks and bonds. And if we just said that your account averages 6% a year, then...
And that would be doing pretty good these days, but...
Well, yeah.
I mean, we like the Family Wealth Consulting Group thinks that they can help beyond this, but for most of us, it's talking about 6% is a pretty aggressive...
I don't think anyone's earned 6% maybe over the last 3 or 4 years,
Okay.
but that's, in the long run, you should certainly expect to earn that kind of return. So you can see how the numbers ratchet up. From 25 to 35, you go from needing to save $500 to about $1,000 a month, and then double that if you start at age 45, $2,000 a month, and then triple it if you start at age 55. So it's kind of a big deal to start early, and they call it, the benefits of compound interest.
Right. And then if you annuitized it, as you might have seen on the table again, it was about $7,100 would be the monthly, and that's if you're paying out principal and interest over a 35-year period.
Right, and you are paying income taxes, as you know.
Yes, and so,
on that amount.
and income taxes aren't really figured into that table. So anyway, it is challenging, and it means that you do want to use, if you can, tax-deferred retirement vehicles like your 401k or IRA.
It really is the #1 way to take advantage of the benefits the federal government affords us.
Okay. What are some strategies that people can use to save money?
Yeah, it's really pretty basic. It's spend less than you make. It's like
easy to say, hard to
do. So in order to do that, you can increase your income or decrease your savings, or a combination,
or your
spending,
yeah.
Or a combination of both.
Mm-hmm.
For some folks, they can work overtime, or they can take a second job.
Mm-hmm.
They can target a career that has them have more control over their income rather
Mm-hmm.
than a salaried position where
Mm-hmm.
your earning is capped at a certain level. For some folks, that might be going into business for yourself or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You really want to focus on long-term investing. I don't think that you'll be successful in saving if you don't take advantage of the returns that are available to you in the stock market. That's what I do all day, is help people take advantage of the free return that's available to them in the stock market.
We call it free return. It ain't easy, folks. But it's because you have to endure the ups and downs of the marketplace.
It's not free of emotional hardship.
But what we say when we mean free is that that the market tends to give a return, what we call a risk premium, over time. Mm-hmm. And you don't have to do anything in the way of trading or anything in order to receive that. It's a matter of investing and holding on long term.
That's right.
And so so I just wanted to explain what we mean when we say free return, because it sounds so easy, but it's not necessarily. So what happens when most people try to do their own investment programs?
So if you take a basket of stocks that's not chosen, that's chosen randomly, say the S&P 500, it's a standard index that's created by a company called Standard & Poor's, 500 stocks in the S&P 500 index. So most U.S. large cap managers track their performance in the stock market against the S&P 500. So that's a good starting place. Yeah. The S&P 500 returns about 9.5% to 10.5% a year, approximately, in the 80 years of history that we have it for. So the data shows us that most individual investors who try to time the market, they buy when they think stocks are going to go up and they sell when they think stocks are going down, tend to actually do the opposite. And in the average investor, the data tells us, produces less than a third of what the S&P 500 produces for them, and that's what I call the free return. So if they would just buy the S&P 500, they would multiply their expected returns by 300%. So that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, well, what are some other things that you can do?
So one thing that happens, tends to happen during recessions or hard economic times, is that people go back to school. And that's a great thing to do, is invest in yourself, increase your set of skills, get some management experience. A lot of folks, I recently completed my MBA, a lot of folks were there to make themselves capable of taking other jobs with higher income potential.
Right.
Also, you really need to set a budget for yourself. If you look at the total money that you make per month and you set aside the savings that you need to do to reach your goals, then what's left is really your budget. And if you stick to that budget and you are religious about it, your mind will start to naturally do the trade-offs that you need to do to make sure you're getting what you really need and want most. You know, do you really need a BMW? I don't know. If you can save enough money and pay cash for it, great, right? But you know, if you look at, well, I got to have my health insurance, I got to have my food, I got to pay my rent, and then what's left after that is just what's left. And it doesn't mean anything about you. It's just how things need to be so that you can preserve your freedom and choices for later.
Right. So in a sense, though, that the savings has to be a line item on the budget.
Oh, they say, it's a famous book called The Richest Man in Babylon, and the philosophy that comes out of that book says pay yourself first. And what that means is, as you go spend money all month after you get your paycheck, you're distributing your paycheck. You're paying other people for services. So when do you pay yourself? You have to remember that it's not about how much you get to spend, it's about how much you save, how much you get to keep. So you have to do that first. So the savings comes out first, savings for retirement and savings for other consumption expenses, especially cars. Don't borrow money to buy a car. So you want to save money for those things first, and then you can spend as much as you want.
Okay. So what are some things that you can do on the expenditure side, maybe to try to help them to
bargain hunting.
Okay.
You know, if you know what you need, and you know, that's the key, is you have to know what your budget is. Otherwise, what's your incentive to go look for $2 or $3 off? But if you know how much you have to spend and you know what you need to buy, then you've got to fit it in there somehow. So, you know, look for specials on the internet. Don't be afraid to cut coupons. Go where the prices are lower. You know, you'll figure out, when your mind starts to look for those lower prices, you'll kind of figure out where the local stores are that are best for you and things like that. And
there are so many tools that are available now that weren't there at one time.
Oh, the internet is a wealth of information.
Yeah, so like there's eBay, there's Craigslist. So you don't necessarily have to have the new thing. You could find a used thing that will do just as well, and you may be able to get it for a fraction of the cost.
Yes.
And
things like
garage sales
cars,
are
furniture,
great. So you know, as I mentioned to you, my father-in-law was a garage sale hound.
Yeah.
And so he would always buy things for, and actually in many cases, especially when it's getting towards the end of the day, people, here, take it. You know, and so it's.
I'm more of an Amazon Prime girl myself, but.
Okay. So we're getting close to the end here. How can a financial planner help?
A financial planner can really help you define your goals and then develop and implement a strategy to achieve them. For some folks, it's the most time and resources they've spent looking at, what do I make? What have I saved? If I keep going in this trajectory, where will I end up? And if I'm not happy with that, how can I change it? And also to think about things like what you want done with your wealth after you're gone. So it's good to spend time planning these things so that you don't just inherit an outcome. Yeah.
So basically helping you to define your financial goals, you know, what are the things that you're shooting for, and then maybe help you to make a plan to how are you going to get there and what is it going to take. And then you may find you have to prioritize the goals. Yeah. What's the most important, and then figure out again how you can make it work. Okay, well, Hillary, I think that we've covered, you know, a really important area, things that people need to think about. We Americans don't tend to think about saving enough and to teach it to our children.
Agreed.
As well as though that we have to provide the example ourselves and figure out how to make it work. And especially these days, though, I think people are finding it especially challenging because there's so many people that are out of work. So, you know, obviously you don't have much income, then managing the outgo becomes even more important.
Right.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being my guest.
Thanks, Mike.
It's a pleasure having you. Folks, we hope we've given you some valuable information here to think about. And we'll see you next time on Financial Insider Weekly.